Well, up next is a corporate presentation. Why India's digital banking boom is leaving 90 million disabled users behind. One of the most phenomenal topic, I will say, and I think it's the success of digital banking should not be measured by how many people it reaches, but I think it should be measured by how many people it enables. The true financial inclusion begins when technology is designed for everyone. The challenge is no longer just a digital adoption, it's a digital inclusion. And that's why I bring in on to a topic where we have a speaker who is joining us on stage. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Abin Roy Choudhury, a technology leader and an entrepreneur with more than 25 years of experience in IT industry and more than a decade dedicated to digital accessibility. As a CEO of Accessifylabs, Abin is driven by a powerful mission to create the world without digital barriers and empower people through accessible technology. Well, his work focuses on enabling capabilities, fostering inclusion, and ensuring that technology serves everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, he is also alumnus of Chief Financial Officer program at IIM Calcutta. He combines business leadership, strategic vision, and passion for creating meaningful social impact through innovation. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Abin Roy Choudhury. Can we have a huge round of applause and welcome him on stage, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. I know, I'm just before the lunch session, so I'll try to keep it short, but I'll try to keep it meaningful for everyone as well. Is my audio clear? Very good. Thank you. So, just wanted to first check, is the slide visible for everyone? Okay, you are not able to read some of the fonts and stuff? Interesting, right? Sorry, is this better? Okay, wonderful. So we just did experience something, and I don't know if it resonated with some of you very quickly. What we just experienced is how a minor, small technology change can just make a user experience better, right? So we just saw a slide where there was text, which was very difficult to read. And now you see a slide which has nice font into it, and you're now able to read it very carefully, right? And looks nice. All right. So before I get started, just want to give a bit of background. I've been in the IT industry for almost 24 years. Been in the digital accessibility space for the last decade. And the mission has been to kind of build an inclusive experience so that we do not leave anyone behind, and we build an infrastructure which can actually accommodate everyone, right? So I want to start with a small story about how I came into this journey and why this journey sticks with me and what deep impact it has left, right? So a decade ago, I was asked to travel with someone to the US, and I had never met this guy. This guy was giving a talk in one of the largest accessibility conference in the US called CSUN, and this individual is blind. So I was given the responsibility to take him along from the airport in India to US and get the talk done and bring him back, right? So I met him at the airport, and the moment I saw him, I rushed to help, because from childhood, whenever I've heard the word disability, two images typically come in my mind, right? One is, someone sitting in a wheelchair, or someone with a stick and a glass and is blind, right? So natural instinct, I went ahead, saw him at the airport, held his hand, rushed him through the ticket counter, security, boarding, we sit in the airplane. The things that change right after that is, he tells me that, Abin, I want to share something with you which is important because we are going to a conference where there will be a lot of people with disability. I said, yeah, please go ahead. So the first thing he tells me is that when you actually saw me at the airport, you came in, you held my hand, and you rushed me through this whole process. Did you ask my permission? And I was like, no, I'm sorry, I did not, right? Because when you think I need help is not when I really need help, right? I am capable enough to do stuff as long as I'm provided the infrastructure. The second thing that he told me is that you held my hand, you rushed me through this process, and you were walking at your pace, which I cannot match. So if you really want to help someone who is blind, the best way to do it is extend your arms or forearms, ask them to hold it, and you walk at their pace, right? So these were such an inflection point for me after almost 18 years in the industry that I've never thought about these aspects at all, right? And I'm sure many of you will now think about it that, okay, this is another aspect of thinking, right? And when I go to the US, I see different technology, how people are interacting, and how the entire disability community is working through. I think that is where the experience enhanced. And this is a business with a purpose. This is a business where you have an aspect of giving back to the society, and there is an aspect of making lives of people better. So that's a short story that I wanted to talk about, why this journey has been so impactful for me. So from the banking perspective, if I look at it, right, these are some of the stats that I put together. If you see, the digital banking in India, it has kind of scaled rapidly. It's almost 295 million digital banking users. 56% has been a year-on-year growth in the Indian market. 9.8% CAGR, which is fantastic, and almost 4x digital transaction has been growing year on year, right? But in this whole context, don't you think that we have left a very large section of people, which is almost 90 million population, suffering from some form of disability aside? And that's where the core digital experience is not being delivered, right? And think about an ROI perspective there. Now, this 90 million number that we are talking about, right? This 90 million number that we are talking about, it is obviously segmented into these buckets. So in accessibility, there are elements which is categorized into 5 official forms. Starts with visual, followed by hearing, speech, cognitive, motor. And this is kind of a short breakdown of that percentage. And we did a census in India, I think around 2011, where the number was around 26 million, which was officially disclosed. And after that, the entire census did not happen. So if you look at the overall number, when rights organization looked at it, they estimate that the number is around anything between 70 to 100 million. Now, this number is people with disability, right? Now, in the category of disability, there are segments also which is situational and which is temporary, right? And no one is talking about that, right? For example, you think about a mother of a newborn child, right? The child on one hand, and they have to do a banking experience on a mobile app. Now, can that individual do it with just one finger and do that whole transaction, right? If yes, then you've made things accessible. But if no, then you've left that experience aside, right? Similarly, and that's what you call as a situational disability, right? But then when you look at it from the perspective of, temporary disability, someone meets with an accident, fractures one hand, cannot use the mouse and keyboard together. Can I navigate the whole banking experience through just the keyboard? If I can do it, great. Then you've solved the problem, which is temporary disability, right? But if you accumulate all of that, now think about if you're making an application inclusive, what kind of digital experience you're leaving for everyone, right? So, the aspect is, as per RBI, kind of 15% of all the Indian banking application that is there is kind of accessible, which means 85% is still a big window that needs to be taken care of. And most of this accessibility is partial, right? So you've kind of, some of them have taken care of by doing some automation testing. Some of them have kind of built mobile apps thinking, mobile apps are generally accessible, but it isn't. There's a huge chunk of PDF documentation, the documentation that customers would typically request during statements. So in an ideal world, all those should go out in an accessible format, right? So if you look at it, there's a big work to be done. And from the perspective of implementing accessibility, there is a global guideline called as WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that needs to be followed, right? So let's quickly now talk a little bit about, okay, on one side, I'm definitely talking about ROI, which is interesting, but is there a legal landscape to it, right? So in India, there was an act which was formed in 2016 called as RPWD, Rights of People with Disability Act, right? The rules of those acts were formed in 2017, and since then there has been a battle or a journey to get that enforced, right? In US, in Europe, this is already being done, right? US has ADA, American with Disability Act. Europe has EAA, European Accessibility Act. So India was a little lagging behind. Now, from the perspective of the RPWD Act, you need to make sure whatever is digitally out there, which is consumer facing, needs to be accessible. On the other side, if you look at the RBI mandate, so now RBI has also come with a strict mandate and circular where not only just the KYC, but the entire banking experience should be accessible, right? We have got the Ministry of Finance, which has notified the banks. We have got the Indian banking standards which has been set, which includes accessibility. And then there is a Supreme Court judgment, which also talks about, as per the Article 21, accessibility is the fundamental right, right? So over the last year and a half or so, a special court has been formed called the CCPD, Chief Commissioner for People with Disability, and penalties have been starting to be implemented. Somewhere around last year, it's a news on Times of India, somewhat around 155 organizations, including bank, some of the government bodies, some of the private sectors, were penalized. And the sum of penalty was anything between 10,000 to a 5 lakh, depending on the number of offense. But the important aspect to note here is it's just not about the penalty. It's about the brand reputation, right? It's a public news, right? You talk about, you care about customers, right? So are we talking about caring fragmented customers, right? Like you're only taking care of some, but you're not taking care of all, right? So I think these are aspects that kind of makes it more and more critical to think about implementing accessibility. As a business case, this is not a charity, right? It's an $8 trillion market globally, right? And then if you think about the spending power of these 90 million population, leaving aside the situational, the temporary, we all wear glasses, we obviously need the zooming capabilities, zoom out capabilities, color contrast, which we are not able to read the text. So I think if you look at that volume, the mass is huge, right? Now let's deep dive a little bit into these business cases. So first of all, it's an untapped market or an untapped revenue, I would call it. So think about you being able to market that we are one of the premium banks which offers accessibility and we promote inclusivity, which is one. It is obviously a curb effect, right? Because when you make an app accessible, you better the user experience. And the myth is that if you're doing accessibility, the user experience policy doesn't. It actually makes it much, much better. which we just saw with one slide shift, right? And then, the first mover advantage, right? Are you able to leverage as a bank, the first mover guys saying, we have already done it. We understand the business value, we understand the pain, and we understand that this is the right thing to do. Obviously, the ESG aspects of it, the lower support cost. See, think about it. Most of the effort is now going in terms of making things digital, right? But if you're not solving one experience, which is making things inclusive, you're actually increasing your brick and mortar costs, because now you have to have a bank, branch, people to support this whole infrastructure. And then obviously it's a digital mandate right now because of the laws and guidelines, because of which you have to do it, right? So brings me to one more story, name anonymized, but one friend of mine, 34 years age. So he was working, he studied, everything was great. Right now 34, lost his eyesight due to some disease 5 years ago, right? Now, he has a salary account with one of the India's large premium banks, right? Now, the good part is, from a banking perspective, he made a great selection, right? But when he tries today to enter an OTP in the field, and because he is blind and he's only dependent on a screen reader to announce stuff, he doesn't understand whether that OTP field is actually labeled well to say that this is what you need to enter, right? The CAPTCHA does not announce back to him through an audio, so he's now more confused that how do I even log in, right? And then he calls up the branch, he tells them, like they put him on hold, then he has to get a family member involved, right? And who likes to share their financial information with anyone for that matter, right? So it is never a matter about a technical problem, it's a matter of dignity, right? So that's where I kind of call it, Ravi is just not the case, right? It represents millions of users who actually want to be independent. And if you're excluding the digital inclusion, you're actually also excluding financial inclusion, right? So now let's go a little things into the assets that generally banks needs to make accessible. It starts with website and the internal banking applications, mobile apps, ATM and kiosks, right? The capability of ATM being able to announce things back was built because you want to cater to people who are blind, right? Communication, like the emails you send to customers, the statements you send to customers, the promo documentation that you send to customers, these also needs to be accessible. You need to have a model where you're able to address these grievances as well. Like you need to understand the user experience of each people with disability so that you can build your banking application in a better way. And then obviously the staff needs to be sensitized because they need to understand that this is also important and how the individual experiences are, right? Just like I told about my experience which got enhanced by traveling with an individual, right? So, as Accessifylabs, this is how we help, right? We help organizations do the accessibility audit of their digital assets, which includes a lot of banks. We help them to identify the problems on their website, mobile app, or whatever digital experiences they have. And then we help them do the remediation to get these issues fixed. We then go ahead and also give them the certification once we are convinced that, yes, they've done things in the right way. We also take care of all these PDF documentation, statement generation that you're doing so that from the source itself, it's accessible in nature. We also have a monitoring mechanism where if you've made things accessible, see, it's a continuous process. You're not stopping your development. You will continue that, you will continue building features, you'll continue releasing new capabilities. So it shouldn't be an exercise that, okay, I've done it once, then I've forgotten about it, right? It should be an element where you're doing it as a continuous process, and we have that monitoring mechanism too. And then obviously the staff training, sensitization, right from the like design, development, testing, and production, this whole team and along with the content, we can do the training for them as well, right? So we are a empaneled vendor with the Department of People with Disability, Government of India. We have auditors who are IAAP certified because that's an important certification to have. We are a global company, so not only do we cater to the Indian companies and the banks, but we also work with a lot of companies globally in the US, Europe, and then obviously, we have a few partners that we work with closely to bring in, great solutions across the board. So whatever I told you, that might look a little complex, look a little broad, but it's basically a three-step process. It's called as ARS, right? Audit, remediate, sustain. And when you do that, it's a very simple, it looks very simple then, right? Because you audit it, you fix it, and then you build a model internally to make that sustainable so that whatever you release in future is always accessible, right? And sorry, why is it not moving? Okay. And see, as a bank, when you bring in an auditor who is taking care of accessibility and things like that, it's also very important to bring in a qualified auditor, right? You need to have the capability of being able to address both automation, manual testing, and actually testing with real users with disability. Because though a manual tester will be able to test a lot of stuff, but they will never be able to replicate a user experience of how a blind individual perceives information versus how a deaf individual perceives information, right? So you need real people who are trained to be able to do that. You also need to make sure that your data is secured, right? As banks, you are the most governed entity. So if you're working with someone who's just an L1, thinks about just offering, maybe a lower cost, but then your data is compromised, that's not the right way of looking at it. And then obviously, remediation support is very important, that not only the auditor is identifying the issues, but telling you how to fix it. And then, they need to have that specific domain credentials to be able to deliver the solution. So typically, these are some of the questions at the bottom of the slide, which you might just ask when you're choosing an auditor, saying, are these already catered to or not, right? So I think the opportunity is right here. For Indian banking right now, 90 million plus, whatever you call that population, one conversation, everyone is saying, give us an inclusive experience. With the AI advent now, and while things are changing, we are also kind of, I was in an AI conference a few days ago, where we kind of discovered that we should actually call AI, and when you add it with accessibility, it should become II, which is inclusive intelligence and not just artificial intelligence, right? And then, think about it, it's a business imperative, right? It's a legal obligation now because RBI, SEBI is everyone behind it. And at the end of the day, it is the right thing to do, right? You're giving an experience for everyone. You're not looking at anyone with sympathy, but you're actually enabling an environment where they kind of become independent and access the most important asset, which is the banking part of it, right? So that's my short information. So I would kind of request every leader in this room that, let's work together to make the digital banking inclusive for everyone, and think about, the 90 million population market if you're thinking about ROI, and if you're thinking about human experience because that's the right thing to do. I think that's the most important element of bringing the inclusive banking experience to the world, right? So with that, thank you so much, guys. I hope this was informative and you learned something from it. Thank you.
I will add a very, very inclusive and I will say a very thought-provoking presentation. Can we have a huge round of applause for Mr. Abin? Also, for doing the honors of felicitation, I'll request Mr. Rajesh Narayanan, National Receivable Head, AHF Equitas Small Finance Bank, to please join us on stage. An absolutely fabulous presentation. I think India has already shown what is possible when technology, policy, innovation, ambition come together. But the next challenge before us is equally important to ensure that no citizen is excluded from the opportunities that digital banking creates. And that was this presentation about.